First of all, really, thank you so much. I know that it's quite early there, but I don't thank you only for your presence. I personally thank you on behalf of the project and all the people here that are working in Europe. Because before your talk, I just wanted to briefly introduce what you're doing in the States that maybe not many people know. I'm sure Eder and Milena will show you, and later on also Joop and John. But you know, many people think that having ideas is, you know, it's enough to make a change, but actually to implement them, you need champions in each part, for each stakeholder. And I do think that Heather in FHWA, now also with Milena, and people like Cart Smith, who is not with us today, but who is bringing forward the project, like John and Joop and all the other colleagues I had the pleasure to meet in the States, they're doing a big impact and making a change. And I don't want to hide that what we are trying to do here is a lot inspired of what you're doing over there, guys. So this is to say a personal thanks for everything you're doing. And after this, I go for the formal presentation of Eder and Milena. They are both from FHWA. And I'm going to present us a little bit of what is the Sustainable Payment Technical Working Group, and then looking at lifecycle assessment in planning and payment design. Eder Dylla is a sustainable payment engineer for the Federal Administration, where she managed this project, the Sustainable Payment Program, and the payment policy. In this role, she's leading an effort to incorporate principles of lifecycle thinking into the design and decision-making process that include the 3 pillars of sustainability, economic, environmental, and social impacts. Prior to joining FHWA, Eder was Director of Sustainable Engineering for the NAPA, where she managed programs that assisted producers, contractors, and designers in improving the sustainability of pavement construction. In this role, she led an industry effort to develop EPDs program for asphalt mixture, and Heather obtained her PhD from Louisiana State University, where she focused on quantifying the environmental impacts of photocatalytic concrete pavements. Heather will shortly present at least the first part of the presentation, while after Dr. Milena Rangelov will that comes from, she graduated in civil engineering at the University of Belgrade, so she comes from Europe, and but she got her PhD at the Washington State University, where her research focus was on concrete durability, material characterization, and concrete payments. She's currently a postdoctoral fellow at the FHWA and working on the Sustainable Payment Program with Heather, and her research is focused on integrating lifecycle thinking into payment design using EPD effectively achieve emission reduction and lifecycle assessment of payment materials, design, and systems. Thank you again. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Oh, I see Milena's got the presentation pulled up. Everybody can hear me well?
We can.
I see nodding. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. On behalf of Milena, John, Joop, and I would like to thank you for inviting us to speak at your conference on this topic. It's one that is, I know, close to all of our hearts, so something we're passionate and excited to speak about. Milena, you can go to the next slide. As in the introduction, my name is Heather Dylla, and I'm the program manager at FHWA for the Sustainable Pavements Program, which has been going on for the last, oh, Milena, you went way too fast.
Sorry.
Yeah, the last 10 years. With that, some of you, as an introduction, mentioned may be familiar with me in my previous position at NAPA. I know I spoke at one of the European asphalt conferences a while back, but it's hard to believe it's really been 4 years since I've joined FHWA. And while putting together this presentation, I thought back those 4 years, and it's amazing how much we've accomplished and in these past 4 years, and the program has grown significantly. And one of the main reasons we've been able to tackle a lot more has been that we've been very fortunate to bring on our postdoc. So Milena Rangelov has been working with us for the last 2 years. And a lot of Milena's research has been focusing on specifically green public procurement and how to integrate that into integrate life cycle assessment into the engineering design and decision making. And this has been really instrumental in our program area to help us guide and direct our program. So in today's presentation, Milena and I are going to give a combined presentation where we're going to be switching in and out throughout this presentation, kind of leading you through, giving you an idea of what are our program directions and how Milena's research has really guided our program areas. So the third slide, Milena, you can go to is our acronym slide. This is something that we had to include in everyone. I guess she already skipped through that, which is fine, but it's there for your reference if needed. But to get us started, I think it's important to understand what are some of the drivers for the work that we are conducting at FHWA. Historically, the environmental impacts have been assessed for projects by the transportation planning folks at FHWA as part of the environmental review process. Many of their decisions may have been driven by top-down initiatives or statewide environmental impact reduction goals that are being set, but they've only typically focused on operational tailpipe emissions in their analysis. However, with the recent years and increase in pressures to demonstrate environmental impact reductions, many of these planners are advancing, and then also in advancement of the state of knowledge, many of these planners are looking at including the environmental impacts from the material decisions and engineering decisions. So we would classify this type of approach as a top-down approach, largely because they got started from the top, looking at it from a high systematic level analysis, and now they're getting further down into the details and the weeds. Recognizing this has been one of the drivers and main reasons why the Sustainable Pavements Program at FHWA was created over 10 years ago. So they saw pressures and indications that, the planners were interested in getting into understanding how materials impact the environmental impact, or material choices and pavement designs can impact your environmental performance. And so they felt that, we needed to be part of this conversation. So that drove the creation of Federal Highway's FHWA Sustainable Pavements Program. Meanwhile, you have another advancement that was happening also in the United States, and that largely came with the vertical construction, being green building codes. And one of the big movements was they replaced the material credits that normally were given for using recycled content in your designs, and instead required transparency by requiring environmental product declarations. So they were really getting into the details of quantifying the material impacts and making decisions between materials or products at that level, and communicating those environmental impacts to decision makers. So industry has responded by creating their own EPD programs, and it wasn't quite long after that state lawmakers have become interested. And California is one of the first to pass a law requiring environmental product declarations for procurement for select materials right now. But we are definitely seeing an increase in interest in this law in many other states regionally. Oregon, Washington are two that are exploring this, as well as Minnesota, Colorado, and we've seen pop-up interest in Ohio, as well as this interest growing potentially federally. So those are some of the main drivers promoting some of the work we're doing. Next slide, Milena. With that being said, the vision and mission, it seems to have a little lag on my slide. Here we go. Of FHWA's Sustainable Payments Program is to advance the knowledge and practice of designing, constructing, and maintaining more sustainable pavements. And I think it's important to note that we're not just looking at this from a design perspective, but we're trying to really consider the life cycle thinking approach to how our decisions impact the future of our assets. With that being said, we do this through stakeholder engagement, education, and development of guidance and tools. Next slide, Milena. So as a result, pillar to our program area, we have convened a Sustainable Payments Technical Working Group. This group is comprised of many representatives throughout that are involved with various processes of the payments lifecycle. So we have material manufacturers, we have construction contractors, we have the designers from agencies, as well as individuals involved with maintenance and rehab, all the way to the end of life. So we also try to encompass stakeholders from various disciplines, being from industry itself, agency, as well as academia. We do meet twice a year. Typically, these meetings have been in person. Due to the recent events, though, we have switched to a virtual platform. And so, in fact, our next meeting will be March 9th. So if you're interested, you're more than welcome to join. They are publicly or open to public, so anyone can join these meetings. Just let me know. With that being said, due to the increased interest in attendance in our virtual meetings, we will likely continue some element of virtual meetings in the future of our program area. So something to be looking for in the future. Next slide, Milena. So as I mentioned, the program started about 10 years ago. And the first phase of our program was to really benchmark that state of knowledge and practice. In doing so, one of the major outcomes that's commonly referenced is the Sustainable Pavements Reference Manual. I don't have the link here, but you could access it by going to our website. But this reference manual just walked through, again, that life cycle of a pavement and identified what could be potential strategies for improving your sustainable performance, looking at the triple bottom line, so your environmental, economic, and social impacts. Also, this reference manual identified various assessment techniques. One of the assessment techniques for the environmental pillar that was identified in this manual was life cycle assessment. Economic would be life cycle cost assessment, and then holistically, we have the green rating systems. But from a social aspect, we recognize that there wasn't a lot. There could be social life cycle assessment, but that's more in the infancy and research stages. Towards the end of phase 1 of our program, we sought out to really develop a framework for life cycle assessment. Life cycle cost analysis, we already have something in place that's been in place for quite some time, but we didn't have any really guidance to how to conduct a life cycle assessment for pavement design decisions. And so the document shown here at the bottom corner of this slide is the outcome of that. And I believe John Harvey will be going into further details on some of the insights of that document. But it really just sets and walks through what would need to be considered if you wanted to do a life cycle assessment for pavements. And then ending out of phase 1, we ended up creating a roadmap. And one of the outcomes of this roadmap is the pyramid that's shown here. The idea of the roadmap was to document some of the gaps and identify where we should be focusing our efforts in the next phase of the program area. And from that, we determined that there was a real need to focus on how can we start to develop pavement lifecycle assessment now that we have the framework complete, so that we could use it ideally to inform our specifications and policy, which you see at the top of this pyramid. Keeping in mind that, all the background pressure and drivers, they're at this wanting this top specification and policy level. But we recognize that there was a lot of work yet that needed to be done to ensure that your data is appropriate to be informing those decisions and that you have tools in place. So the second phase of our program has been really focused on filling in those gaps and details. Next slide, Milena. So with that being said, what data that is needed depends on your goal of analysis to be studied. So to better understand where to focus our efforts, we evaluated LCA's fit in the planning and project delivery process to identify what barriers currently exist and to identify which one would be the likely goal to be implemented first. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Milena because she was really the one that was instrumental in leading this effort for FHWA.
Great, thank you, Heather. And first, I'd like to thank Davide for inviting us to speak at this conference and for a nice introduction. I hope in the future we can have more in-person meetings. I for sure know my wish list for European travel has increased, and 2020 has not helped that, just became longer, hopefully in the future. So thank you for that. Okay, so here we are summarizing our study on LCA fit into planning and project delivery. So this is kind of more of big picture thinking of how we can do and introduce better environmental decisions on many levels of decision making. This slide shows LCA framework, based on ISO 14040. Do you guys see my mouse pointer? Can you confirm that?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So I'm not. Yeah, exactly. So I can use that. Okay, perfect. And then based on we know it has goal and scope definition, inventory analysis, impact assessment, and lastly the interpretation steps. So with that in mind, we know that LCA is a powerful methodology, but it's very versatile and it can be tailored and shaped to many types of decisions and types of the analysis. So the question is how to shape that to fit the best to our decision making when it comes to transportation. So we had a peer exchange, which I'll talk about in just a moment, but we went through each and every phase with 4 key questions. Why are you running the analysis? What's the purpose? How are you currently running the analysis? And then to see how LCA can easily fit. And then what data do you have and what data do you actually need in each phase? Lastly, who component is who runs the analysis and interprets the results, and more importantly, who makes the decision, what are the decisions we can impact in each and every phase. So with these 4 questions, we evaluated how LCA fits into every decision-making phase. We conducted a 2-day workshop in Minnesota, and we had representatives from 6 state DOTs, from California, Minnesota, Washington, Iowa, New York, and Texas. And from each one of these agencies, we had pavement design representative, as well as 1 planning or environmental specialist. The goal, again, was to outline the current planning and project delivery process and see what stakeholders think, how LCA can fit best into their decision-making phase and satisfy their needs. This slide shows like a flow chart of how current project delivery process generally looks like. So in this slide, I will just briefly go over this, our paper, I'll give the reference to in one of the later slides. You can find a lot more details in the paper. Now, this is a limited format. If you're interested more, each and every phase is described in great detail there. So long range plan is the first phase where we're starting. That's usually 10-year plan in which states are determining general goals of their transportation program. How do they want to advance mobility or, asset condition, equity, safety, etc. So this is a big picture thinking. It's basically the directions. Where are we now? Where do we want to go in the future? States do this in many different ways. For instance, some assess the needs, some assess how much funding they have. But generally speaking, there is a shift to introduce performance-based metrics into the long-range planning, which is important, and environmental considerations can be one component of that. Next phase is called STIP or programming. STIP means Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. This is a 4-year plan, which is financially constrained. So with each and every subsequent phase, we kind of clarify decisions a little further, and we have a little more precise information, and we basically know what we want to build and create. So in STIP, projects are scoped and prioritized, and fundings become allocated and narrowed down. Projects from STIP advance into project development, and I believe this audience and myself as well, we're probably more familiar with project development. As you can imagine, that's like geometric design of pavements, pavement design, the way we think about that, like structural design, as well as life cycle cost analysis. We have different types of environmental permitting right of the way. There is a series of different types of analysis that go into the project development. Then the next phase is bidding. This is assuming design, bid, build mechanism. It's not the only mechanism, but here we included bidding because it's highly relevant for EPDs, which we will discuss later. Basically, successful contractors are awarded the project and they get to construct it in the next phase. So here is the construction phase, you know, where the rubber meets the road and everything, all decisions get clarified and finalized. So this is the end of project delivery process, but from the perspective of our pavement, that's just the beginning. Then we start our use phase. We have, you know, traffic operations. We're doing different preservation, maintenance activities, and our asset and performance management activities. So in this study that I'm showing today, we did not include this phase per se, but we have a recent study that looked into sustainability and LCA fit in asset management. That's our newer work. Now I'll talk about how LCA can fit in each one of these phases. So in phase one, long-range planning, probably the most appropriate way to introduce LCA is through consequential LCA analysis. That's because we are looking into the big picture. Oftentimes states create policy and consequential LCA is a suitable tool that can inform policy using different types of environmental considerations. In terms of data, we need like big picture data with low level of granularity. We're talking about regional or national averages and some of the transportation system performance data depending on the study. We think probably agencies don't have enough staff and expertise to conduct this analysis, so if needed, it would be outsourced to researchers or LCA consultants. Readiness level for this is gauged as medium. Again, one barrier could be the lack of the industry sector large scale data that would support this type of analysis. For STIP or programming, network level analysis, likely attributional network level LCA would probably be the way to go. By doing that, we can inform project prioritization that's done as part of the STEP and also provide for the environmental disclosure, which is what some agencies want to do, to basically measure what were their emissions and then see how they can do better job on the system level next year, etc. Again, here we need a little higher granularity of the data. We're talking about regional and state averages and then historical data and performance that state DOTs are collecting. Readiness level here is also medium. Currently, we don't have readily available network level tools. And again, data on long-term performance, as well as the management and transfer of that data are some of the hurdles that we need to overcome in the future. For environmental permitting, oftentimes in US that's called NEPA analysis, and there are other types too, but NEPA is the common one. Usually project alternatives are compared and the purpose is disclosure, and the purpose of LCA could be in disclosure and comparison of the alternatives to attributional LCA. Here, we need the data of higher granularity, state data, even county data, because we are assessing sensitive areas, land use changes, and these other types of parameters. Likely, if LCA would be conducted, environmental specialists would do that. However, we gauge the readiness level as medium-low. The reason is the impact assessment methods currently in the US don't have enough of regional specificity for some of the impacts. And again, there is the potential for refining impacts such as land use change, etc. We gauge this as medium-low, not because it's like insurmountable barrier, but because it's somewhat outside of the domain of our, our own stakeholders. It's more on end of EPA and other environmental organizations to kind of refine and improve those methodologies. For project development and pavement design, attributional LCA that's tied to LCCA to make everybody's life a little easier would be the way to go. And we can use that to inform design selection and provide benchmark environmental impacts for your quote unquote average pavement, whatever that may mean. State, even county data, so data with higher granularity and local material production, historical construction data, all the data DOTs already have are important pieces of this puzzle. Readiness level is gauged as high, And what John and you will show later is Pavement LCA tool that does exactly this type of the analysis. Some of the challenges we have encountered are the need for transparency, consistent LCA framework, and again, data, supporting data is always an important element. In this slide, I'm showing just one example how decisions can be informed using LCA plus LCCA, so impacts plus costs. So here, for instance, in the upper left quadrant, we have alternatives that have similar costs, but they differ by environmental impact. So in that case, obviously, you would select the alternative with lower impact. On the diagonal, we have alternatives that differ in terms of cost, but they provide similar impacts. Obviously, you would choose the one with lower cost, assuming, again, each satisfies your desired engineering performance. If we have similar costs and similar impacts for both alternatives, we would turn to alternative bidding or introduce some additional considerations such as pavement type continuity or some local considerations in terms of, who is your material supplier, what relationships you have, what has historically performed well. However, if our alternatives differ both in cost and in impacts, we can have this win-win situation where we have alternative with low cost and low impacts versus the one with high cost and high impacts. And this is easy. You would probably choose something that provides low cost and low impacts, again, providing satisfactory engineering performance. However, if you have, an alternative that costs a little more in order to produce lower impacts versus something that's a little cheaper but has higher impacts, you have to do trade-off analysis or introduce some alternative metrics. This is super simplified, just to kind of give our stakeholders an idea how to what are the possibilities to inform decisions. What I'd like to emphasize here is that we need to define what does it mean similar? What does it mean different? What are these differences? And we had a really nice presentation before from Dr. Tony Perry about uncertainty. So there is many layers that can be added upon this, but this is only to show multi-criteria decision-making at work. Okay, going back to our decision-making framework, the next step is bidding. As we saw from what Heather showed, there is an increased interest to use EPDs in bidding to inform material selection. But we don't have to be limited to materials. We can also use whole pavement design. So in that case, we would have attributional LCA for pavement design. And then environmental impacts would support the winning bid selection. Here again, the granularity of the data increases. We need project-specific data. We need to know exact quantities, equipment use, and all of that would be submitted by contractor or material manufacturer. Here we gauge readiness level as medium. In terms of EPDs, we'll talk about that in just a moment. There is currently a lack of comparability and harmonization. Plus EPDs need to be consistent, or consistent pavement LCA framework should be used and supporting data to make sure all bidders are treated fairly. So this increases a little bit of complexity when you have other participants involved. Construction is an excellent stage to collect all sorts of data. Already as-built reporting is being done. So this is very potent life cycle stage to collect the data about what actually happened in the field. So we would have as-built EPDs for the exact materials that were used in the project, equipment usage, traffic detours, everything that has happened. And based on the experience, we know it's easiest to collect the data right then and there. So why not add that other layer of data in terms of EPDs or construction equipment and just make everybody's life easier down the road. We think readiness level is high. However, there is still a need to establish systems for data collection and data management. So in this slide, we have our flow chart with all these decision-making phases, plus all types of LCA that can support these analyses. They are color-coded, orange, yellow, and green, based on the readiness level, and we'll talk specifically more about LC in support of pavement design. That ties nicely into the tool John and you will show. EPDs used in bidding and a little bit on construction. Here I added these green arrows that show that the data collected in construction stage can actually be reused and inform all of these other stages, and that's kind of the importance of that. Here is the reference of the paper. There is a lot more information. I just ran through it, so if you're interested, I encourage you to check it out. So with that, I'll turn over to Heather to tell us a little more about LCA Data Needs.
Thank you, Milena. So building from Milena's studies results, FHWA has really focused its efforts on developing the data needs to support LCA in the pavement design decision making with that goal in mind. And this fits really well, as Milena described, because it runs parallel to the life cycle cost analysis. And so much of the data which you would be collecting, economic data and the design data, material quantities, etc., during that life cycle cost analysis, it would supplement and run parallel for LCA. So you don't really need that much additional data. That being said, what you do need is the material inputs and environmental the outputs from all the upstream processes. And it's shown here in orange, a lot of these processes are owned by others, being the industry data. It should come from some sort of industry. You know, in the past, or in an economic study, we have the dollar that flows, and as it flows from one material manufacturer to another, it increases and values added to it as it transforms. But we really don't have a way to communicate the environmental footprint through this chain, and EPDs are really becoming a mechanism to do that. Next slide, Milena.
Heather.
So if you were to zoom in on the pavement system, this diagram shows the system boundaries of LCA for pavements, zooming in on how EPDs could fit in to fulfill some of those industry data needs, the additional data that the agencies may not have. So Milena is hovering over the aggregate production area there. And so you can see that you have energy going into the system, you have some waste and emissions, and all of that would be reported in an aggregate EPD. And if you were to go down to the asphalt binder, again, you have energy. If you go to admixtures, you have energy, and you have some common areas of data that should be the same and consistent in all of these in order to build up to a broader LCA. In addition, Milena, if you click, we do feel that the construction phase is where we can start collecting these EPDs and start encouraging industry to develop the EPDs, start collecting them, and then hopefully we can average them and use them to inform LCAs in the future. Moving to the next slide, Milena.
Heather, sorry to interrupt. Can I ask you if you can do in a couple of minutes, possibly, to wrap up?
About what?
We are running a little bit late. If you have a couple of minutes.
A little bit late, wrap up. Okay, yes, we're almost done. So with that, if we were to quickly look, Milena, go to the next slide on what EPDs are. I'll briefly run through it. EPDs are an LCA report, and they help the manufacturers communicate their footprints to decision makers or to the next business line. That being said, they're not required by any federal law, and right now there's inconsistencies in how the EPDs the PCRs are being created, and that's really the underlying document that makes the EPD. So I look at EPDs being an LCA report that follows industry standards prescribed in that PCR, the product category rules. Next slide, Milena. The industry has already responded, and there's many industry manufacturers that already have EPD programs in place. The only one missing right now on this table is Asphalt binder, but they did do recently a LCA study that's publicly available. And I think they are continuing to have conversations on whether or not an EPD would be appropriate. Next slide, Milena. That being said, I think it's important to note that there is no overarching agency ensuring that there's quality of the PCRs or any harmonization. The quality of the PCRs really ensures whether or not you can even compare EPDs from that program. And FHWA has done some work looking at the comparability and the harmonization in the different PCRs and EPDs that result from these programs. So I'm going to turn it over quickly to Milena. She'll quickly go through some of her slides as we try to wrap up here and lead you into the next phase of this program.
Thank you.
Yeah, just real quick, we have consistency in terms of that all EPDs are covering cradle to gate analysis in terms of impact assessment, 5 mandatory environmental impact categories, cutoff criteria. So these are some of the common elements. However, there are differences in validity period, allocation protocols, material and energy inventory, as well as the background data sources. So in this slide, I'm showing our other study on EPDs, and I would like, this is the loaded slide that shows all of our methodological elements. What I would like to preface here is that we are in this study showing how EPDs can evolve from being communication tools to being procurement aid, as well as the data source at the end. But that requires, you know, different prerequisites for EPDs to advance from one stage to the next. We have stricter and stricter key considerations in order to ensure environmental improvements and create systems that enable us to claim, okay, this product indeed has superior environmental impact than the other product. A lot more information available in this study. We are encouraging agencies to start collecting EPDs because they will be inputs in our LCA tool and conduct pilot programs, as well as get enough education to participate as stakeholders in creating future PCRs. One last thing, Heather showed the pyramid here. So this is all of the elements of LCA that we are kind of refining and defining to lead us to this final outcome of ensuring environmental improvements. One more thing that's done in our studies and in our work is the use of common public background data. That's something we strongly advocate for because they enable us to have all these benefits of public procurement because pavements are in the public domain, and this public data is supported by federal LCA Commons, again, publicly available for everybody. And by that, we're ensuring fair treatment of stakeholders in all of these other considerations in addition to environmental improvements. Heather, this is the last slide.
So with that, FHWA has a lot of ongoing activities. We are trying to work with the federal LCA Commons to identify background data datasets that are available to support EPDs and could be used in prescribed in PCRs eventually in the future. We're also looking at technical considerations that could be recommendations for PCRs or any EPD program operators that are developing PCRs, as well as looking at creating a framework in OpenLCA, recognizing that OpenLCA is a tool that many do not use and is probably more for LCA consultants. We did create a LCA benchmarking tool that is more user-friendly for the state agencies. Everything that is in the OpenLCA and the federal LCA Commons is in line and harmonized with the benchmark tool called LCAPave, which you're going to see a demo about. What I would highlight is unique and different about this tool is in why it's the first in its kind is one, it uses identified background data sets that I mentioned from the federal commons, again, emphasizing the importance of public data supporting these analyses. It also was created with stakeholder input, so the state agencies were really the ones driving the interface and the goal and scope of the tool in itself, so it was really created for them in mind, to help them and support them in making their decisions, as well as industry was both along in providing technical feedback and comments throughout the process. Lastly, it does incorporate EPDs. So everything that we've said, you know, throughout how EPDs could be a building block, it is created so that EPDs could be a data input into the tool in the future. And I would like to highlight that today you're going to hear from John and Yoop, and they are half of this study. They're the LCA benchmarking effort, but a whole another group that's working on the background data sets. The LCA Commons is being led by Dr. Amlan Mukherjee from Michigan Tech. So with that, I guess we can turn it over and see a demo of our new tool. And all of our resources are here, and my contact information is there if you have any questions regarding FHWA's Sustainable Pavement Program.
Thank you very, very much, Heather and Milena. It was very, very interesting, and as David mentioned, very inspirational to see your approach, such a holistic approach that you have at national level in the US. I'm even, I would say, even really jealous about it because, well, first to see the PCR focusing on just modules A1 to A3, that is something that could make things much easier for us here. But also it's really great to see how at national level you manage to gather academics, industrials, different departments of transportation, the Federal Highways Administration, all discussing all these topics, and which go far beyond just the simple LCA. You know, LCA at the end we realize that LCA is just a small tool, just a small part of the whole process and the whole system. So thank you very much for this presentation. I have a very small question from the audience. Is could you explain the difference between consequential and attributional LCAs?
Yes, that's one of my favorite topics nowadays. We are doing a consequential study for Puerto Rico for diversion of waste tires into ground tire rubber versus tire-derived fuel, for instance. So attributional LCA is an LCA that describes and accounts for all of the inputs attributed to the functional unit. So EPD would be a really good example of attributional LCA. Because you're describing status quo, you're describing what happened with one product. However, consequential LCA is investigating the consequences of the decision. So let's say for my study in Puerto Rico, what happens if we mandate all of the pavements to be prepared with ground tire rubber instead of HMA, which is currently the situation? So how does the whole system changes based on that one decision? So they have economic elements. They can be policy oriented, etc. So there is a broader picture. And I think in Europe, there has been many excellent studies and frameworks for that. And I think the use of consequential LCA will only increase in the future because it does provide this big picture thinking.
Indeed. Thank you for the clarification. Davide, I think we are very late.
Yes, so we are late. Just before that, very quick question, and again, thank you, Heather and Milena. And Heather, can you confirm that which standard do you refer to? Because here we have the SAN and we have to comply with them. Do you look at the ISO standard, ASTM? How do you do your EPDs?
Right now, it's ISO standards that are the only ones that really exist, and it's largely being led by the vertical construction standards that are being produced and what these green building rating codes are being emphasizing importance on. And that's been a challenge here because, you know, the states, we go through AASHTO, and AASHTO really hasn't taken up a lot of writing standards in this topic area, which then leads to ASTM, as you mentioned, and ASTM is the committee is largely vertical construction focused. So right now we're struggling with where is the fit that this, you know, some of these standards would come, where's the best place, but right now it's ISO. And with that, we do actually, like, Milena and I are gonna jump, so we won't be able to see you in John Harvey's presentation. I apologize. We have another peer exchange that starts in 11, but we'll participate for some of it.
That's fun. Thanks so much. I was already thinking about harmonizing between Europe and the States, but we can do this in another episode.
Yeah, that would be great. One of the things I want to do is a scan, a European scan or something on this topic, because I think it's growing.
Or next LCA conference in Europe.
There you go.
Possibly. Okay.